Hey, but where I'm going to start this morning is the US Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, have recently released a report reviewing the treatment of children and adolescents with gender dysphoria. Called Treatment for Pediatric Gender Dysphoria, it was commissioned earlier this year. The report included a diverse group of authors, doctors, psychologists, bioethics, ethicists, philosophers, aimed to examine the available evidence and practices around care for minors experiencing gender dysphoria. The report concluded that evidence supporting the benefits of medical interventions such as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and surgeries for minors is limited. And it also highlighted potential risks associated with these treatments and included, amongst others, infertility, loss of sexual function, reduced bone density. Now, just days after the HHS report dropped, our government announced it would halt new prescriptions of puberty blockers for minors from mid-December. Existing patients will continue to have access and blockers remain available for other medical conditions. Some organisations have suggested the timing suggests the HHS report helped influence or reinforce New Zealand's shift. Penny Marie is a founder of Let Kids Be Kids, and it is great to have her on the show again. Penny Marie, good morning.
Hi, Leah. How are you?
I'm great. Lovely. Always wonderful to have you on the show, and I thank you for your time. Can we first start with your thoughts, because I didn't talk to you after this announcement made by our government to halting new prescriptions of puberty blockers?
Yeah, so I just want to go back to what you said there. I think the timing is really important of the American document. My understanding is that on the 19th of November was when the New Zealand government announced their announcement about the puberty blockers, that they were going to pause it, awaiting the NHS research coming out, which is the UK. Then hours later, which was the 20th here, but the 19th in America, that was when the Human Health Services report dropped that you mentioned. So it actually came out afterwards, although they had produced the first version of it back in May, and then this one is the final version with all the appendices and corrections to it. So my thought on it, and of course this is just what I'm observing, is that New Zealand government potentially was pushed to rush the announcement. And when I say rush, they've been sitting on the data and the feedback for a year now. Why did they choose the 19th of November to put it out? And then hours later, the HHS report came out, but they're backing the UK version. So that's sort of when I contacted you, and I was like, wow, I sort of want to talk about this from another angle. And I want to go through just some critical things that I think are really important to sort of roll back some things, and then we'll look at the American stuff. So, yeah, can I?
Well, I will. You will. I love it.
I'm raring to go, and I've got all these notes.
I know you have. You're always so well informed and prepped. I just want to quickly though, just in New Zealand after that announcement, there was a plethora of yay and then detractors, and just for you. Halting new prescriptions as of middle of next month. I mean, that's great, but I mean, does it go far enough?
I feel like the government may have been forced into some sort of a corner by someone to make some sort of an announcement. So I do think that was a good start. I mean, literally the worldwide, it was trending on Twitter within 24 hours. I was keeping an eye on it because the world is waiting for these sorts of announcements to come out. Yeah. And why I want to talk about it is how I believe there are many fish hooks with it that are really fundamental, and they go back to the core of our universities, the universities who they then call the experts from the universities that are connected with WPATH, who are also then being published in mainstream media. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, which is they would have been prepped and ready to go with their responses, the lobbyists. They have loaded all the bases, they have all their deck of cards, and we as alternative media, and by the way, for me, very unfunded people out there like us who are trying to scramble and write roreports on, and then also trying to keep a handle on the narrative. So that's kind of where I'm at, is if we all just say, yes, great, it's finally done, we're not looking beyond the headlines as to what we see that they're queuing up to do to us next.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. All right,
And
so
it's
look,
and it's the same as like when you look at, you know, the sex education guidelines being removed, or we've been raising the alarm bell for 2 years now on the shift into surveying of the children. And that's really what I want to focus on a lot today, because where does the data come from that
yeah,
that invites through research the trans lobbyists to say that there is a problem? It's all in the wording. So I
yeah,
even went back to the Substack that I wrote back when the puberty blocker consultation was closing here in January. And I personally actually called out, and I wasn't trying to stop people from submitting their consultation if they wanted to, but the very question at the start forced people who responded to agree with them that gender dysphoria was a problem. Now,
right,
I look at the education and the push of where they created the narrative. So children then believe that they are experiencing gender dysphoria at rates greater than ever, but it came back through. So they loaded the education system with a narrative. Then they surveyed the children with swayed questions that create the problem, and then they offer their solution.
yeah. So yeah, I know what you're saying. Do you want to discuss? Can we discuss the HHS report?
Yes,
Did you want to get
I
it?
want.
Yeah. Can you talk? Where do you want to start? Do you want to talk about the? I mean, who commissioned it? Why was it commissioned? And can we talk of the group that was involved? Is that important?
That wasn't kind of what I was focusing on, but the Human Health Services, which obviously is being run by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And actually what I wanted to talk to you about
Yes.
around this is I want to address Trump derangement syndrome, because, and again,
Trump
I sort of wanted to
derangement.
do it Trump derangement syndrome is
Yeah.
where if anybody hears that something has come from the Republican Party or Donald
Oh yes.
Trump or RFK Jr., they'll dismiss it out of hand. So what I would like to do is actually read out some of the things that they've published. Because if you take your Trump derangement syndrome hat off and you listen to the words as a parent or an educator or a medical professional, I believe you can't fault their logic. I
Yep.
believe that what they've got is straight what I would write, you know, as
Okay.
a person
Yep.
who's seen the fallout of it. But because the media and the education system have put Trump derangement syndrome out through the consciousness of the people, people won't look at it.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
this is where I think the conversation about the puberty blocker announcement is very important, because we're focusing on the NHS in the UK. Now, the NHS in the UK is, is a different regime. They're under a different political regime.
Yeah.
And they are, arguing about things where we know are not true, but we aren't able to get the truth and the balanced narrative into policy. Right? Because
Yeah.
we've got what I believe are the wrong people who are lobbying for policy, who are called the experts and who have the doctorates.
Yes. So
Does that
you're
make
saying
sense?
that it is, and you're saying that we should look more to the American, the HHS report.
I believe that we should be, yeah. So
Yeah.
I can just read out. I'm just going to read out a couple of things from the actual. They did a summary document,
Yeah.
which
Great.
just summarizes things. So let me just read it out, because again, please take your Trump derangement syndrome hat off. Which, by the way, the lefties, like you live in the social media space, and I'm really always curious as to what the responses are whenever someone like me posts something. Now, I'm not, I've never been a flag waver for it. I've waited until the documents have come out and I've read them. I've read the executive orders. I've read the presidential actions, and I want to just quote some of them, because if you didn't know who was writing it, you would go, well, why is that not a New Zealand policy?
Yeah, I get you.
Okay.
Yeah, go on then.
So one of the phrases that they use in this report is sex role non-conformity. So they're actually changing the language to, because they took going back to what we talk about, which is sex-based rights rather than gender. We've got to help to change the language. So it says, over the past decade, the number of children and adolescents who question their sex and identify as transgender or non-binary has grown significantly. While sex role non-conformity itself is not pathological and does not require treatment, okay, because it's in the head, the use of pharmacological and surgical interventions as treatments for pediatric gender dysphoria has been called medically necessary and even life-saving.
Mm.
Motivated by a desire to ensure the children's health and well-being, parents of transgender identified children and adolescents often struggle with how best to support them. Many of these children and adolescents have co-occurring psychiatric or neurodevelopmental conditions, rendering them especially vulnerable. When they seek professional help, they and their families should receive compassionate, evidence-based care tailored to their specific needs. Society has a special responsibility to safeguard the well-being of children. Given that the challenges faced by these patients intersect with deeply contested issues of moral and social significance, including social identity, sex and reproduction, body integrity, and sex-based norms of expression and behaviour, the medical practices that have recently emerged to address their needs have become a focus of significant controversy. So they're starting off there acknowledging the controversy that has been created. Now, who created the controversy? Because it wasn't naturally occurring. We haven't suddenly become a gender non-conforming race. So this document, I believe, is really important because it's not just looking at the medical agreement under the DSMO that there is such a thing as wide-ranging and rapidly expanding gender non-conformity. They are addressing that it has happened through some social change, right?
Yes, how it's got this way, who's behind it, who's pushing it.
Yeah, and then it says the diagnosis of gender dysphoria is based entirely on subjective self-reports, and that's what I'd like to talk about, and behavioural observations without any objective physical imaging or laboratory markers. So there's not laboratory data on this, and the CAS report says it, and even in the Ministry of Health guidelines report that came out last year, that was acknowledged. Okay. So why are we in New Zealand and in countries that follow the sort of British way of things, why are we still having this argument? Why has it taken so long? And you've got to pull back 10,000 feet and go, well, who is profiting off this taking so long? Because it is not the children and it is not the families.
Yeah. So no, well, you're right. Who is? It's such a. I always call them cottage industries, but that's not kind of appropriate for this, where it has in itself become an industry, right? Purported by the media.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's what because. Yeah, because there is now such a big. It's not like you said who's benefiting from it, and at the end of the day, they're saying it's the children. They're doing it for the young people who have dysphoria, but it's not for them.
No, it's not for them. And yeah, that's right. And so instead of, because I get really tired of hearing like all the, we're all bashing about in the weeds trying to figure this out, but there's some fundamental things that happen way back further up the chain. Like let kids be kids. We always talk about going further up rather to see why they fell in. Why are all these industries now existing? Oh, gee, because someone's profiting. This is what this report says. It says, nevertheless, the gender affirming, and they use the brackets here because they're showing you when they're using their terminology and bringing it back. The gender affirming model of care includes irreversible endocrine and surgical interventions on minors with no physical pathology. These interventions carry risks of significant harms, including infertility, sterility, sexual dysfunction, impaired bone density accrual, adverse cognitive impacts, cardiovascular disease and metabolic disorders, psychiatric disorders, surgical complications, and regret. And there has been inadequate research into the frequency and severity of these. So I'm just saying that to put that on the record, because why do we still need more research on this? Why has the NHS said that they're going to conduct more research on this? They're creating more industry. They're creating more doubt. They're trying to put more information on the record that is creating, the flawed surveys.
Yeah. Can we talk to how children, because I don't know how this works. How do children get diagnosed with gender dysphoria?
Yes, and that's really where I want to go with this is you've got to ask how do they get the diagnosis, and this is where I started looking at this 2 years ago now, nearly 2 years ago, and we put reports out a year ago. We've given the report to New Zealand First, surveying in the schools. And by the way, this really pertains to Sue Bagshaw. So Dame Sue Bagshaw is the key person in New Zealand behind something called the HEADS assessment. Now, we're trying to raise the awareness for more and more parents to reject their child being surveyed in school. Heads is one of them. So Sue Bagshaw, she teaches it to year 5 medical students, and she teaches them how to survey children who are under the age where, like underage, they shouldn't even be going off to the doctor's surgery on their own. So it happens in doctor's surgeries, it happens in school, and there's one online survey that schools use called Good Space Schools that refers to the Heads assessment, but there's other surveys in schools. They could all year 9 students in public schools are going through this now. They could be asked it when they go to the counsellor's office. They could be asked it at the hospital, and they could be asked it online. So the Heads assessment is one of the tools where they start saying, oh, what are you identifying as? What's your gender identity? Do you feel safe at home? Can you talk about this with your parent? So we have massive alarm bells on that, because that's how they're gathering their data to then say children are experiencing gender distress. So when you ask about a diagnosis, firstly, they've had to set up a method by which to diagnose and label. And I hear stories like some high schools, you got 50% of kids are on some sort of medication. The crisis is bad, but it's not going to get fixed by asking them more questions. That's what's created the crisis in my mind. So then the child would get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and off they go into the funnel. And now with the conversion practices legislation, the only standard of care for these children that have had a diagnosis, and by the way, question who's doing the diagnosing as well as the survey questions, is gender affirming care. They cannot say watch for weight. They cannot say, let's pray about this. They cannot say, you are beautifully and wonderfully made and God created you. They say, here, social transition, pronouns, and changing your name at school secretly is called social transition. It will move into pharmaceutical and medicalization. It's a one-way funnel. So then you ask, who's winning, and why can't we have an alternative discussion about this?
Yeah. And well, you've asked a great question. Why can't we? Because when we do, we get piled on or tried to be shut down. I think through all of this, Penny, this is what's always been so mind-blowing to me is that, like you said, they can just answer a survey, ask a few questions by the school counsellor, and suddenly they're in the wrong body. I mean, if you were an alien that landed on the planet and you just said that to them, they'd be like, we're doing what to the kids? Because
they'd jump back on the spaceship and go right home.
Well, that's another conversation, Penny. But yeah, I mean,
can I roadmap something for you then about that?
Because yes,
okay, so I'm just gonna call out Radio New Zealand as one space. So let me just run you through what happened last week when we had this announcement. So yeah, on the morning of the 20th of November, I think it was, I've got it written down, the government made their announcement, and Radio New Zealand put an announcement up about the pausing on the puberty blockers. And then in the afternoon on the 20th, they had another announcement. Then the next day they published an article which was from the lens of trans stigmatization and a poor young person who thinks that this is a terrible thing. The next day they published an article where it was featuring Dame Sue Bagshaw, on her side of the fence. So that's their experts, right? And then, so I've just talked about her with the Heads assessment, and she trains our medical students. And then the next day they had an article which was a repost from another agency called The Conversation, and that was from Jamie Veal. Now, Jamie Veal is a trans, so biological male presenting as a woman, who works at the Waikato University, and she heads the transgender research lab. So then you go back to all the surveying. So she is PATHA, so the Professional Association for Transgender Healthcare. She has a vested interest in increasing and expanding and profiting off this industry. She was one of the main people behind something called the Counting Ourselves survey, which again is surveying children, which I want to come back to that because I've got a research paper I want to talk about with that. But so so that research paper also was referenced in the WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Healthcare, Standard of Care Guidelines version 8. Okay, so then you go New Zealand children being surveyed
Mm.
by him,
Him.
then feeding into referencing for the changes of the WPATH document. They're all connected.
Right.
But
Yeah.
her article on November the 23rd lands on Radio New Zealand.
Yeah.
Okay. And then on the 24th, they did another one. Let me just, I'll go on my notes here. And then on the 24th, there was another one. So there is, it's very swayed, but then you go back to the conversation being this website where his article, initiated.
Yeah.
And it is connected to all of the universities in New Zealand. So the universities, who we know are a captured agency, who have their so-called experts, so they're very lefty, and they've got all these trans people and all these trans activists in there. They're writing the articles that are then getting picked up in the mainstream media.
Yeah. And around we go. Around and
around we go.
Yeah.
And then they will call people like us who are questioning it all the names, right?
Yes.
So
yeah. I know that was a big sigh, Penny Marie, because I know when you explain it like that, I mean, it is very clear. And I mean, we know that Radio New Zealand, I mean, I look at their page every day, and as soon as it was announced, I saw all of those articles. You know, they literally interviewed every single trans group that they could find. You know, like you said, like Path, they got them. They printed what they said. In fact, I'll tell you what they said about it. They went, "It must remain in the hands of young people, their whānau, and their healthcare providers, not political bodies." And that was splashed all over. And
that in itself is flawed, because it goes back, I mean, as we know, it doesn't even really bear commenting on, but it goes back to the way that all of this stuff rolls out, and including the sex education, is that the education department throws out this, and it's critical pedagogy, is that it's child-centered. You know, and I've called out Tracy Cleland from Canterbury University, who I just recently found out has gone off to Australia, but she's the one who's been on One News. She was on there when I was on the same article I was on there, saying, saying that children know best and they should be telling us what they want to learn about sex education. And my parable on that is, if a child wants to drive a truck, do they teach the trainer how to drive the truck? They don't know how to drive the truck.
Yeah.
That's what education should be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's all backwards. The survey, I just want to go back to it because I've got some quotes
surveys.
The Counting Ourselves survey, which is just one of them, there's a whole lot of them. They're all generated through the universities, which then provide their data. And like I was saying, it gets used overseas and things like WPATH. And I just want to do a call out to Sabina and Marie from Lesbian Resistance. So I work quite closely with them as far as our research. And so one thing I want to say is we have got more research than we've been able to put out, partly due to funding. But we will be putting research papers out on our Let Kids Be Kids website soon. And so Sabina from Lesbian Resistance has just completed one specifically on this Counting Ourselves survey, which was initiated. Jamie Veal from Waikato University was a key proponent of it. So the key things to know is these New Zealand policies that come out of this rely on these surveys, not clinical evidence. Okay, which is similar to the UK trial. So the UK trial that they're doing is going to be survey based. They're going to survey children, and they're going to decide who they diagnose as having gender dysphoria to go into that trial on puberty blockers. So it's not clinical; it is a result of a survey. Yep. And then and advocacy surveys does not equal medical research. No. So the surveys are not based on science. It's based on feelings. So if you're surveying kids based on feelings who have been preloaded with sexualized comprehensive sexuality education, then we have a problem back there. That's why I focus mainly on the educational side. It's also not representative. So it's a self-selected sample. It's not a population level sample. And it uses ideological framing, which goes back to what I was saying before about they preload the words such as gender identity, and they're making a presumption that that's fact. And then so their conclusions are built into the questions. Now, I did marketing training, and whilst I didn't become a professional survey writer, I can pick swayed language when I see it.
Yeah.
And they did that even with the puberty blocker. Well, everything that's coming out of the government stuff is swayed. I mean, the COVID one, for example, the question starts off, what do you think we had an adequate response to the pandemic? And I couldn't answer the question because I don't believe we had a pandemic. So with the puberty blockers, they said something or other about, do you think this is appropriate? For people with gender dysphoria. And I'm like, we have to talk about the gender dysphoria thing before we can answer the question, right? Yeah. So in the CAS review, there was a warning that there is no evidence that puberty blockers improves mental health, right? And then there's the safety concerns that I talked about. So this calls into question all of the stuff around the Counting Ourselves survey, which is coming through the university.
Yeah. Okay, so Penny Marie, this goes obviously deep, deep, deep into the bones of universities, these associations, surveys, which I'm sure people listening didn't even know was happening. And I'm sure you've been asked this before. I might have done it in a previous interview with you. And then now on top of this study out of the States by the HHS, how do you even crack this egg? I mean, you said you worked tirelessly on this. Well, and as you've said, you're not funded like, these big, the WPATH and USPATH and all of them are. Where do we start?
We have to go back to history. So I just want to bring it back to something that happened in 1919 in Hungary. So I found out about this actually, because again, like some people have been looking at this for a while, but people like me who are parents who weren't activists and lobbyists, we've only been looking at it since we started to feel like something was wrong. Yeah. So you're rapidly sort of assimilating everything and you've got to change the Overton window as to how this happened. But so back in 1919 in Hungary, in the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a man called George Lukács, and I probably am not saying that correctly. So one of the first things that he did as a deputy commissar for culture was he introduced sex education into primary schools with the long-term goal of dismantling traditional value systems which had family at its centre. So the way that happened, and then the Frankfurt School was created in 1920, and then that, because it came through the universities, through the Frankfurt School, what it fundamentally did was shift the dial on how and what was being taught through the universities. So that's how this critical pedagogy, the sexualization stuff, and I've talked about it, previously on my videos on YouTube. The Frankfurt School infiltrated the American academic system because it didn't start in America. Okay, and the Americans in there now who are trying to clean this out, they know that, or they need to know that, which is one of the things I was doing over in Washington. Yeah. So they nearly. So I'm reading off an article here, and I'll put my links into the Substack that I put out with this video on it. But it nearly dismantled American society, and is a massive contributing factor to dismantling the family role. Which is, firstly, what they've got to do to sexualize the children is they've got to cast doubt into the minds of everybody that parents are able to help their children out with sex education. Yeah. So now they've done that through the media and through the education system and through accessing children directly. So we have to understand how big this is. It's come from Lukács, who was a Marxist. Okay. And he joined the Communist Party. So this hasn't gone away. It's gone out through the education system. And then the education system, where do they go? Oh, they go into our governments, don't they? Yeah. And then they either go into our governments or they become the advisors to the governments. Right. So either way they look, all the information that they're getting has one specific lens on it. Yes, but that's I know, and gosh, you've gone back to 1919, and we're about to go to 2026, and of course, since over all that time, it has morphed into what we've got now. I suppose, like you said, what's the solution? Yeah, well, there's all these research now coming out that is either ignored, it's not used as evidence. As you said, media, education, universities, they push it, they ignore it, they push it to the side. So we just have to continue to bring it up.
I suppose
Well,
it's,
the way that, yeah, I mean, my understanding of what happened in that part of the world was the government fell, and it fell
yeah,
on this topic.
yeah,
Okay, because this is at the hearts and minds of families, which is actually the government should be there to protect them. So when it comes clear that they're harming them, something has to be done. The government fell, and it was because of parents. It was because of the mothers. It wasn't because of the scholars. And that's why I
right,
do what I do, because
yeah,
parents have to become aware that their greatest job is to protect their child. And it's hard to admit that we're having to protect our child from the government, the very government that should be serving us. But that is the truth. And that
mm,
is what we're all rapidly unraveling. And we're all scratching our heads as to why it's so hard to get this out. Well, who runs the media? Who runs the universities? The
yeah.
governments. So it is us. It's the alternative. I'm so grateful that that we have platforms like the platform, and that we can come to. And I was listening to Bob talking to Sean yesterday and saying the same thing.
Mm,
We got to all work together on this,
yeah.
because
Well said, Penny.
yeah. So
Yeah.
may I just quickly? I know we're
Yeah.
probably running out of time, but what
No,
I would
no.
like to do is I'd like to read out a couple of different proclamations and things that are on the White House website, because Trump has been putting out proclamations and presidential actions since he came in around this topic. And
Yeah.
I've sort of got a map here. So me and some of the other researchers, we do all these big mind maps. So I would say, and I haven't, this is not an exclusive list, but just quickly ripping this together yesterday, the core issues with New Zealand education is gender identity, gender ideology and identity disruption, number one. Number two, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Number three, the teachers' unions and the centralisation of power into the Ministry of Education. And number four, the removal of parent rights and authorities. Now, I've managed to pull 6 presidential actions and proclamations from Donald Trump this year that answer the issues of that. So he made a proclamation in March called, it was actually National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Sorry, that wasn't March. I think it was recently. And it says one
Yeah.
of the most prevalent forms of child abuse facing our country today is the sinister threat of gender ideology. Proponents of the gender ideology movement are outrageously indoctrinating our children with the devastating lie that they are trapped in the wrong body. Those are words from Donald Trump. You might hate Donald Trump, but if you disagree
Mm,
with that, then you are not on the right side of history. So that is exactly helping the issue we're dealing with here in New Zealand around gender ideology coming through school. And by the way, not just through sex ed, but through all curriculum subjects. Then there was a presidential action document on protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation. Now, this is where the basis of that report that they've come out has come from. He
right.
said in action, they had to go and do the research. They have to take the time to do the research to put it into a medical paper. And I really believe and pray that that is because that is the basis of the trials, the court battles that are coming. They have to have their experts providing the documents. It won't come from people like you and me because we're not medical experts. So what
Yeah.
this said was medical professionals are maiming and sterilizing a growing number of impressionable children under the radical and false claim that adults can change a child's sex through a series of irreversible medical interventions. This dangerous trend will be a stain on our nation's history, and it must end. Are you liking Donald Trump right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then there was another one, a presidential action on defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth. Now, the lefties, they rant and rave about this and say, he's saying he wants all trans people to die and every trans person,
Yeah.
is at risk. And so we have to flee the country. And by the way, we had a Colorado family flee here because they were so afraid of it. What was he actually
Mm,
saying? It said there, basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, and trust in government itself. It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These sexes are not changeable.
wow.
He wasn't saying he
Awesome.
wanted anybody to die. He wanted to
No,
go
didn't
back
hear
to
that.
biological truth.
No.
No, but
Didn't
that's
even
the
say
spin.
trans in there. That's the
Didn't
spin.
even say,
That's the
yeah.
that's the what did you say? The Trump derangement syndrome.
Trump derangement syndrome. So
Syndrome.
they
Yeah.
twist it, and then people only reading the headlines, so they're not looking at actually so they're misquoting things. There was a presidential action on reinstating common sense school discipline policies. Now, this one is really interesting because it actually speaks to critical race theory, which we know is destroying our education, or has potentially already destroyed our education system. So it says schools ignored or covered up rather than disciplined student misconduct in order to avoid any purported racial disparity in discipline numbers that might catch the eye of the federal government. Now, this really does reach into the critical race theory stuff that we're dealing with. So that was one about common sense school discipline policies. You see, the inability to discipline our children. So kids know this.
Of course.
That's all come through the critical race policy, that some people are oppressed, and equity and all of that. So people are not treated based on their behaviour, they're based on the colour of their skin or their gender ideology or where they've come from, right? So that's, and by the way, the link I've got to that, to where the issue is in New Zealand, is the teachers' unions and the centralisation of parental in the Ministry of Education, all completely captured socialist organisations. Then the final one is, there was another one, improving education outcomes by empowering parents, states and communities. That was a presidential action. And this is the biggie: closing the Department of Education would provide children and their families with the opportunity to escape a system that is failing them. Wow. The Education Department was created, let me just go quickly to a link here. The Education Department in America was an unconstitutional department that was created by Jimmy Carter. And this is a quote from an organization called Purple for Parents that I met with in the US, for the Communist Teachers Union, as payback for getting him elected. So we have to be brave enough to look at the root of the teachers' unions and the Ministry of Education, because without them, we would actually probably be able to have a balanced education system that's teaching what we think our children need.
Well,
the
I'm
final
not a fan
one,
of the teachers' union. All right, we might have to wrap it up though there, Penny, but give us your last one.
The final one is a presidential action on ending radical indoctrination in K-12, and that says parents have witnessed schools indoctrinate children in radical anti-American ideologies while deliberately blocking parental oversight. So that is the one pertaining to the weakening of the family relationship. So I'll put all that in a Substack.
As always, Penny, like a lot of information, which is just, it's such an eye opener talking to you, and I, I always come away from our chats with well, I have to listen to it again, really.
I know it's a lot. It's a big information dump, but I'll take the opportunity and people can re-listen.
But look, you always, but you always, as you said, it is as we have to, as parents, but you have to be made aware of this, and we just have to keep pushing, keep talking about it, because that's at this stage what we can do.
The solutions will come from those of us who are brave enough to ask the hard questions, and who can help each other to come up with the solutions. We've got to become alternative advisors for the government. And the only party that I've sent resources to at the moment is New Zealand First, so ups to them, but we'll talk to anybody who'll listen. Yeah.
Penny, thank you so much again. That is Penny Marie, founder of Let Kids Be Kids. Got some